Max takes on an oil giant. A true story, written and narrated by Max Whitehead. It was a long walk from the workers' car park to the main gate of Shell Geelong's oil refinery. Max was very conscious of his new work boots, crunching across the gravel as he made his way to the administration block. It's 1979, and this is Max's first day as a utilities operator at Australia's largest oil refinery. As he passed the workers' time clocks, he made a quiet pledge to himself. There is no way I will spend the rest of my life punching a time clock. One day I will run this place. It was an ambitious goal, but at 24 years old, Max had plenty of time. He knew it would take years to climb to the top, but he was ready. Certified to run high-pressure boilers and steam turbines, he met the requirements for the job. His experience working on oil platforms in the North Sea gave him an edge over the hundreds who had applied for the lucrative oil industry position. Australian law required Shell to employ only government-certified operators to run its high-pressure boilers and superheated steam turbine generators. These qualifications were rare in Australia, but Max had them. He was stepping into a vital role. The entire refinery depended on the utilities division to provide electricity, superheated steam, cooling water, and the compressed air that powered the refinery's pneumatic instrumentation. If the utilities section failed, the entire refinery and much of Victoria, which relied on its petrol, would come to a grinding halt. The scale of the responsibility excited Max in a way he hadn't expected. Max completed the paperwork in the administration block. Then Jim Watts, the quiet-spoken utilities supervisor, entered the office. He handed Max a brand new hard hat and earmuffs and simply said, "Follow me." As soon as they stepped outside, Max was struck by the noise and smell of the refinery. Jim and Max didn't speak. They had to wear earmuffs because the noise was deafening. This was an industrial jungle. 24 hectares crammed with massive columns and pressure vessels, towering as high as 15-story buildings. Multiple fume stacks loomed overhead, pouring out exhaust fumes, steam and other gases. Pumps and compressors, all sizes, shrieking, some as large as buildings, others no bigger than a small animal. Without warning, pipes would violently spit out condensate, adding to the chaos. Everything seemed alive, vibrating, roaring, spitting, demanding constant attention. Threaded through this mechanical maze were hundreds of kilometres of pipes and electrical cables, ranging from as thick as 1.5 metres to as narrow as 1 centimetre. The smell of volatile gases was ever present. Lighters, strictly prohibited. This was a place where even the smallest spark would lead to catastrophe. A fire or an explosion was every oil man's worst nightmare. Clearly, refinery operators needed to be astute, alert, and highly skilled to manage the potential hazards of this industrial monster. The utilities unit was run by 30 certified operators, many of whom had been there since the 1950s when the refinery first opened. These men, now in their 50s and 60s, consider themselves a cut above the other refinery operators. Why? Because they had government-mandated qualifications. Without them, the refinery couldn't function. Max quickly realised that many of these older operators resented newcomers, especially young upstarts like him. They resisted change, distrusted new technology, and clung on to the old ways. Their reluctance to embrace Shell's move forward to computerization made Max's early days very challenging. Yet he settled in quickly, working around the clock on shifts, doing overtime. Younger operators like him were recruited, but the division between the old guard and the new generation remained clear. The older men held back the younger ones, preventing them from taking initiative or expanding their knowledge. After years in the utilities section, Max took stock of his career. He had achieved nothing towards his secret ambition of running the refinery. He hadn't moved one step up the Shell hierarchy. He noticed a pattern. No operators, no matter how capable, were promoted beyond their entry-level roles. Instead, Shell brought in young university graduates as managerial cadets. These cadets were sent to The Hague in the Netherlands for Shell indoctrination before starting real work. Once they returned, they were paid generously, given company cars, and sent on frequent overseas trips. Meanwhile, the operators who actually ran the refinery were treated like expendable labour. If you didn't have a university degree, you were nothing in Shell's eyes. Late one Saturday evening, while working a shift, Max stood on a massive pipeline carrying crude oil from a ship docked at the refinery. He thought about the millions of dollars in profits Shell executives were enjoying at that very moment. And it was all because the operators working in the refinery enduring unsociable hours and dangerous conditions. Yet Shell's elite lived in wealth and luxury, while the operators were treated with contempt. Max walked back to the control room for a cup of tea with his colleagues. The scene was bleak. Chipped, mismatched mugs stained with years of use, worn out wobbly chairs, a cracked table covered with over-seeping tea and stale biscuits, men slouching, exchanging the same old tired stories. It was a stark contrast to the gleaming high-tech control room and refinery outside. The equipment was state-of-the-art, machinery was well-maintained and cutting-edge, but the men, they were treated as disposable. For Max, this was quite an insult. When he voiced his concerns, the older men dismissed him. "Grow up. You should be grateful you're here at all." Their complacency frustrated him. These were men who had sacrificed their lives for Shell, missing family milestones, working through exhaustion, only to be cast aside as they neared retirement. Max realized something vital. These men weren't fighting for better conditions because they were waiting for their retirement and had given up. But he hadn't. If Max wanted to rise, he needed to take control of his own future. He needed to get out of the utilities unit and into the part of the refinery where he could stand out. He had to move to where Shell's management paid attention. That week, Max did the unthinkable. He applied for a transfer out of the utilities unit and into the broader refinery operations. He had realized something critical. Utilities was a cost center. It did not generate profit. Management saw it as an annoying necessity. The refinery's production units made money. Shell's executives focused their attention there. To realize his ambition, Max had to get himself where Shell's management's shining lights were focused. He requested a transfer to the catalytic cracker unit, the most profitable unit in the refinery. The culture at the cat cracker was radically different. Shell's top management constantly hovered around, eager to maximize profits. They cared about what happened there. They listened. For Max, this was the start of a whole new game. A month later, Shell announced that The Hague had approved a multi-million-dollar investment in a new crude distillation unit called CDU4. This new facility promised to revolutionize operations, running at unprecedented pressures and handling vast volumes of crude oil more efficiently than ever before. Shell's enthusiasm was clear. This plant was poised to generate millions of dollars of profit. By 1986, construction of the CDU4 plant was well underway, with commissioning planned for late November. One Saturday, while on his day off, Max decided to visit the CDU3 plant operators and witness the progress of the new plant firsthand. Initially suspicious, the CDU3 operators hesitated to share their thoughts with Max. However, as he explained his genuine interest and the lack of ulterior motives, they gradually relaxed, and what they shared next deeply troubled him. CDU-3 operators were deeply concerned that CDU-4 was unlike anything they'd encountered before. Its design was more complex, its process more volatile. The increased pressures meant hydrocarbons would be highly unstable, igniting instantly if they leaked into the atmosphere, even without an obvious ignition source. Adding to their anxiety, Shell had installed a brand new digital control panel, a stark departure from the familiar pneumatic system that they'd always used. None of them had seen this technology in operation before, and unknowns surrounding its performance left them uneasy. But the most alarming revelation was that Shell expected these operators to run the CDU-3 plant as usual while seamlessly integrating the CDU-4 into their workload, as if it was just a mere extension rather than an entirely different beast. A senior operator confided in Max, his voice low but urgent. If something goes wrong, this explosion wouldn't just take out the plant, it would wipe out half the refinery and the surrounding housing estates. He concluded that the only way they could manage CDU-4 safely was if Shell assigned additional operator to each shift. As Max left that afternoon, a knot of unease settled in his gut. The operator's fears weren't trivial. They were genuine, deeply felt concerns, grounded in decades of experience. Yet, Shell's management seemed dismissive of the dangers. Max likened the situation to piloting an airliner. Most of the time, flying appears routine, but takeoffs and landings demanded immense skill and concentration. When problems arose, it is only the pilot's training and quick thinking that can prevent a catastrophe. CDU-4 was no different. In an emergency, it wouldn't be a computer shutting the plant down, it would be an operator's expertise and instincts keeping disaster at bay. Shell, however, didn't see it that way. Their actions made one thing clear. The company viewed its operators as expendable, a necessary expense rather than the heart of the refinery. This revelation only fueled Max's determination. If he were in charge, he would fight to ensure every operator was trained and supported before being asked to commission CDU-4. Instead, Shell's approach was reckless. Management ignored the very people who knew the risk best. If something went wrong, they would be quick to blame operator error. Yet the true failure was Shell's refusal to listen, refusal to act responsibly. Disturbed from what he had heard, Max shared the operator's concerns with his colleagues at the Cat Cracker. Their response was immediate. Everyone saw the danger, but how could they get Shell to listen? Max decided it was time to de-escalate the issue. He approached the operator's union representative, a man known as Long John. For years in his position, Long John was supposed to be the voice of the workers. But when Max explained the CDU-3 operator's fears, Long John barely looked up. His response was curt and dismissive. "Mind your own effing business." Max left the conversation seething. It had become clear Long John wasn't interested in protecting the operators. He enjoyed his power, but he had no intention of challenging management. Determined not to let the issue die, Max began speaking with other operators, uncovering more frustrations with Long John's leadership. Many felt ignored, their concerns brushed aside. Worse, whispers of corruption surfaced. Long John was often absent, supposedly on union business, but nothing ever seemed to come of his trips. Operators were paying union dues, but what were they getting in return? One day, a colleague casually mentioned that Long John's presidency was up for re-election in 4 weeks. Gary Warren, a fellow operator, turned to Max with a smirk. "Why don't you take him on, Max?" In that moment, Max realised if the operators wanted change, they couldn't rely on someone else to fight it for them. They had to do it themselves. And Max was ready. Back at the Cat Cracker unit, Max shared his findings with his workmates. One of them, Gary Warren, spoke up. "You know, I was in Sydney recently," Gary said, "and I had a chat with some of the shell operators there. You won't believe it. But they're paid significantly more than us, and their working conditions are better." Max frowned. "Has Long John ever mentioned this?" Gary shook his head. "Not a word." Then, almost as an afterthought, Gary added, "By the way, Long John's role as president is up for re-election in 4 weeks." He gave Max a pointed look. "Why don't you take him on?" Max had a lot to consider. Running for union president would give him the platform to fight for the CDU4 operators, to push for better safety measures and more staffing. But at the same time, it could jeopardise his long-term goal of managing the refinery. He thought back to Bob Hawke, the former president of the Australian Council of Trade Unions, who had risen to become Australia's Prime Minister. If a balanced, sensible union leader could gain the respect of the public and even reach the country's highest office, perhaps this could be an opportunity rather than a risk. Later that evening, Max sat at the Cat Cracker tea room, turning the idea over in his mind. Across from him, Gary watched him carefully. "You've got to run, Max," he said. His usual grin replaced with a serious expression. "You're the only one who actually gives a damn about what's happening." Max exhaled, staring into his chipped mug. Could he do this? Could he take responsibility of leading men who'd spent their entire lives working in this refinery? What if he failed? Gary leaned forward. "Mate, you're already the one speaking up. And that's what makes you different. Long John doesn't see us as people, just numbers. You're the change we need." Max thought about the older operators, men who had lost their hearing, suffered injuries, or missed family milestones working relentless shifts. Many had been forced into double shifts just to provide a better life for their kids. These men had given decades to Shell, yet they were ignored, underpaid, and overlooked. Max clenched his jaw. "This isn't just about me," he muttered. "It's about all of us. Someone has to make a stand. And if not me, then who?" He heard his old personal motto ringing in his head. "Don't wait things to come to you. Go and get them." Max pulled in the nomination papers. It was official. The campaign was on. To prepare, he made a list of promises that he would fight for if elected. 1. Fix the pay gap between Shell Sydney and Shell Geelong. 2. Push for extra manning on CDU4 to ensure safety. 3. Improve working conditions for operators. 4. Create a clearer path for those who wanted to advance. 5. Establish a monthly union newsletter to keep the workers informed. 6. Hold regular union meetings so every operator had a voice. 7. Ensure that no union leader attended management meetings alone to prevent backroom deals. Without realising it, Max's entire campaign was a direct response to Long John's failures. Max visited all 9 control rooms, ensuring he personally met every operator. He wanted to listen to their concerns, not just talk at them. He even pinned his campaign notice on every notice board in the refinery. Throughout the campaign, Long John never once engaged with Max or the operators. He refused to address their concerns. Instead, he relied on intimidation and arrogance, expecting his long-standing dominance over the union would be enough to secure his victory. Max wasn't backing. On election day, the hall was packed. The air was thick with sweat and tension and anticipation. Long John stood at the front, arms crossed, scowling at the crowd. He hated that he'd been forced to take this seriously. Max, seated in the front, felt every eye in the room on him. Some were curious, some sceptical, but many were hopeful. Long John tried to rush the vote through without giving speeches. "All right," he grumbled, "let's get this over with." But Gary wasn't having it. "Hold on," he called out. "Shouldn't we hear from both candidates first?" A murmur of agreement rang through the room. Long John glared at Max, but had no choice. Fine, 3 minutes, he spat. Max stood, rolling his shoulders to steady himself. He faced the crowd, locked eyes with the seasoned, hardened men in front of him. He took a big breath. Long John's right about one thing, Max began. Experience matters, but it's not the only thing that matters. A few heads lifted, some nodded. We're not here because we want to be. We're here because we have to be. Because we're tired of being treated like second-class citizens in a place that won't function without us. Max's voice grew stronger. This isn't about me. It's about all of us. Every operator who has been ignored. Every man who has given a dangerous shift with few hands. Every one of us who has given our time, sweat and safety to this refinery while being treated like we're expendable. The room was silent. He leaned forward. We deserve better. And if I'm elected, I won't be sitting in an office making deals behind your backs. I'll be in the trenches with you, fighting for every single one of us. A sea of hands went up in support. Max won. Long John stormed out, humiliated and furious. Max was now the union president. The fight had just begun. That afternoon, Max went along to Long John's unit and asked for the union documents. Long John sneered. Get lost and stay out of my way, he said, turning and walking away. Max stood his ground. I need those union documents to run the union. Long John's voice rose, loud enough for everybody nearby to hear. F off and get the F out of here, he spat before striding out the door. Max watched him go, unfazed. So be it, he thought. I can manage without Long John's history of neglect. Returning to the control room, Max wasted no time. He contacted the Shell's industrial manager, Brian Loughnane, and asked if he could drop by his office for an introduction. After getting permission from his team leader at the Cat Cracker, Max made his way to the offices. Brian Loughnane was a serious but pleasant man, likely in his 30s. He was tall, clean-cut, and carried himself with composed, cautious demeanour. A man who rarely made mistakes. Brian congratulated Max on winning the union presidency and asked, do you plan to lead as Long John did? Or will you let the union secretary run things like most unions? Max's response was clear but firm. I intend to take full control just as Long John did, but I'll run it completely different. I hope you and I can develop a working relationship that benefits both parties. Brian nodded thoughtfully. He then mentioned that the refinery manager wanted to hold a special afternoon tea later that week to thank Long John for his services and that Max was invited. Max accepted. When the day arrived, Brian introduced Max to key managers, including the refinery manager, Mark Sellers, as well as the senior managers, Peter Jones and Dennis Goggin. It quickly became clear that Long John wanted nothing to do with Max. The refinery manager tapped his cup, calling for attention. He thanked Long John for many years of service. Long John, clearly flattered, gave a gruff acknowledgement. Then the manager turned to Max. Would you like to say a few words, Max? Max stood and spoke with conviction. I want to thank Long John for his years of service representing the operators. Moving forward, I'll be leading the union differently. I won't be attending any meetings alone. I'll bring my assistants wherever possible due to our shift schedules. I'll also be publishing a monthly newsletter which management is welcome to receive. And at our first formal meeting, I'll be raising the operators' concerns regarding the manning numbers for CDU4 plant. The room fell silent. Management did not look impressed. Long John scowled. But Max wasn't here to please them. He was here to represent the operators. The next day, Max called Brian and requested a formal meeting. Brian agreed and said, a list of issues isn't necessary at this stage. Let's just meet first. Max knew that standing up to management wouldn't be easy, but he was ready to fight for the operators' rights and well-being. At the same time, he sincerely hoped he would develop a relationship with management where he could debate openly and work towards solutions that benefit both sides. The biggest issue facing the operators was the manning numbers of CDU-4. Max spent weeks gathering every piece of information he could find about CDU-4 plant and the serious concerns raised by the operators. With meticulous effort, he compiled a detailed report. At their first formal meeting, Max arrived with his 4 colleagues, Peter, Harold and Gary, along with one of the CDU-3 operators. They faced 3 key managers, Brian Loughnane, Dennis Goggin and Peter Jones. Max seized the moment when it arose, presenting this report clearly and concisely. His voice was steady as he outlined the operator's sincere, pressing concerns. 1. The lack of training for CDU-4 operators. 2. The significant risks in commissioning a brand new plant. And 3. The chaotic reality when unexpected issues arose, especially during commissioning and starting up. And 4. The critical need for operators to act swiftly, confidently and decisively in emergencies. He reminded management of the hazardous nature of their industry, citing catastrophic disasters that had occurred at other refineries worldwide. His final statement was firm. This is not a request. It is a necessity. In the name of safety, we require 1 additional operator per shift to ensure CDU-4 is operated safely and responsibly. The managers listened politely. When Max finished speaking, Peter Jones barely hesitated before dismissing all concerns outright. The new computerized technology won't allow any problems to occur, and in the likely event that something does happen, the computer will safely shut the plant down. Operators won't have to do a thing. Then with finality he added, "Make no mistake, Max, CDU-4 will be commissioned and no extra manning will be put on. Now, what else do you want to discuss? I have another meeting to attend." Max felt his frustration mount, but kept his composure. He persisted, emphasizing the importance of safety and the need to listen to the operators on the front lines. Running CDU-4 is like flying a passenger airliner, he explained. Takeoff and landing requires the utmost skill and attention. If a problem arises, it's the pilot's training and instinctive reactions that determine whether a disaster strikes. The same applies to operators. But Shell's position was unwavering. As far as management was concerned, the discussion was over. The operators would have to shoulder the extra workload without question. As the commissioning date grew closer, Max continued to raise the issues again and again, and every time, management dismissed him. In one particular tense meeting, as Max spoke, Peter Jones turned his back on him and stared out the window in open contempt. The message was clear. Shell did not care about the operators' concerns. Eventually, Brian Loughnane proposed a compromise. Let's run CDU-4 with the current manning levels as a trial. If concerns remain, we can raise them again. Max responded immediately. Would Shell be willing to add an extra operator for a trial? And if no issues arise, we can remove them. The answer was swift. No. Max called for a mass meeting to discuss the issue of CDU-4 manning. He carefully set the agenda and drafted a resolution in case the operators wanted to take strike action. At the meeting, he stood before his fellow operators and spoke with conviction. This isn't about a payday, it's about our safety, our dignity, and looking out for each other in a workplace that values production over people. He scanned the room. The weight of his words hung in the air. They'll say we're troublemakers and we're being unreasonable. But what's unreasonable is sending a man into dangerous conditions without accountability. What's unreasonable is pushing a machinery so hard it breaks and treating the operators the same way. Silence, then murmur of agreement. The operators were ready to make a stand. 20th of December, 1986. Max informed management that the operators intended to commence strike action. The only way to stop it is to provide extra manning, he said firmly. Shell's response was blunt. How many times do we need to tell you? No extra manning. Max immediately requested management issue instructions to all control rooms for a controlled and coordinated shutdown of the refinery. Everyone in the room understood the risks. Shutting down a refinery was just as hazardous as starting one up. It required careful coordination, especially with the critical units like CDU plant and the cat cracker, which could take up to 3 days to shut down safely. The managers said nothing. Max suspected they were in shock, struggling to grasp the reality that strike was now inevitable. After the meeting, Max called both the State Union Office and the ACTU, that's the Australian Council of Trade Unions, to notify them of the situation. He requested for assistance and was met with a frustrating response. You shouldn't proceed with a strike, Max, it's Christmas. We're shutting our offices. But Max had deliberately chosen the timing. It would maximise the impact and apply political and public pressure on Shell to respond to the dispute quickly. He knew what was coming. The entire state of Victoria would be starved of petrol. The pressure on him was enormous. It's lonely on the front line leading a battle, thought Max. Yet he found strength in the loyalty of his fellow operators, like Gary, Peter and Harold. They could have walked away. They could have just enjoyed Christmas and left the CDU3 operators to fight their own battles. But they didn't. They stood by Max, and in return, it was his duty to lead them with wisdom, strategy and strength. By the following morning, Shell still hadn't issued instructions to shut down the refinery. Max immediately put his request in writing. If management has not issued shutdown instructions by lunchtime, I will provide the media with a copy of this request, informing the public that the union has sensibly asked Shell to coordinate a safe shutdown, but Shell has refused, placing both operators and the public at risk. At the final hour, Shell capitulated. They issued the shutdown instructions, agreeing that some units would be idle rather than shut down, to keep the pipelines and furnaces warm, preventing damage from cooling. 3 operators would remain at the Mogas plant overnight to ensure that the highly corrosive and dangerous hydrofluoric HF acid process had stabilised before they left. The strike was officially on. Late that afternoon, Bob Kernahan, the union coordinator from head office, who had occasionally dropped into the refinery to wave the union flag, called Max with urgent news. Max, the union lawyer Mike Forshaw, just got a call from the Australian Conciliation and Arbitration Commission. They want you and him in Melbourne for a hearing at 2:30 p.m. today to discuss the strike. Max nodded, though his stomach tightened. You won't have to say much, Bob assured him. Mike's been briefed and he'll handle the legal side. You just need to be there. Max called Gary, his vice president, and explained the situation. Bob's been keeping his distance until now, Max admitted. I reckon the union and the ACTU are pissed that we went ahead with this strike before Christmas. Gary let out a chuckle. Too late now, mate, we're in it. The 2 men caught the next train to Melbourne. The journey was tense. The rhythmic clatter of the rails was the only sound between them. Gary tried to keep the mood light, cracking jokes, but Max barely heard them. His mind was racing. This was uncharted territory. A formal hearing meant Shell's legal team would be there, professionals in suits, ready to dismantle everything he had fought for. And Max, he was just an operator with a high school education. Arriving at union headquarters, they met Mike Forshaw. The lawyer was sharp-eyed with a crisp suit that looked out of place next to Max's oil-stained boots. Mike handed Max a coffee. Relax. You've done the hard part already. I'll handle the legal arguments. Just stick to the facts if the commissioner asks you anything directly. Easier said than done. As they entered the commissioner's grand chambers, the sheer formality of the room hit Max like a brick wall. polished wood panelling, towering columns, a high bench where Commissioner Payne, a no-nonsense man in his 60s, was already seated. Then the opposing team entered. Shell's legal representatives, tailored suits, expensive briefcases, and right in front, Brian Loughnane, Shell's Industrial Relations Manager. Brian caught Max's eye and gave him a nod, a simple acknowledgement. Mike Forshaw opened with confidence, outlining the operator's concerns clearly and persuasively. Then Shell's lawyer spoke, calm, precise, every word designed to paint Shell as the responsible party and the operators as unreasonable. Max's blood boiled when their lawyer dismissed the safety concerns as exaggerated, his fists clenched under the table. Then the Commissioner leaned forward. "Mr. Whitehead, I'd like to hear directly from you." Silence. Max's heart pounded. This wasn't the plan. The union lawyer nodded at him, a subtle sign to stand up and speak. Max cleared his throat. "Commissioner, this isn't just about money or inconvenience," he began, steadying his voice. "It's about safety, our safety, the refinery's safety, and the safety of the people living nearby. We've been raising concerns for months. If something goes wrong, it won't just be us operators who pay the price, it'll be the entire community." The Commissioner nodded, his expression unreadable. "Thank you, Mr. Whitehead." He then turned to Brian Loughnane. "Mr. Loughnane, I'd like a private discussion with you and Mr. Whitehead in my office. Everyone else will remain here." The office was smaller, more intimate, but less intimidating. The Commissioner sat behind the expansive desk and gestured for Max and Brian to sit down. His expression was stern. "Gentlemen, this situation is untenable. The public interest demands resolution. Mr. Whitehead, Mr. Loughnane, can a compromise be reached before a strike escalates further?" Brian adjusted his tie. "Commissioner, my hands are tied. Those directives come from Shell's executive leadership." Max exhaled sharply. "The operators have given a clear mandate. They won't back down unless they get extra manning for CDU4. This isn't a bluff." The Commissioner steepled his fingers. "You are both here as representatives, not decision makers, but I believe this impasse is not unsurmountable. Here's what we'll do. Convene with your respective parties, discuss thoroughly, and we will reconvene New Year, and I expect progress, no excuses." The meeting was over. On the train ride back, Gary tried to assure Max, "You held your own in there, mate. That's what matters." But Max wasn't sure. Could he rally the operators again after everything they'd been through? Would the union stand behind him? Could he face Shell's relentless machinery to come out unscathed? As the train rattled through the countryside, Max stared out at the passing fields. Everything felt like it was moving too fast, but he knew one thing for certain: there was no turning back. When they got back to Geelong, Max dropped Gary off and sat at his table. The operators needed to hear from him clearly, directly, and urgently. He drafted a notice with deliberate care, ensuring every word conveyed resolve while leaving room for honest discussion. Notice to all operators. You are invited to attend a mass meeting on Friday the 26th of December at 10 a.m. at the Union Hall in Geelong. This meeting is critical. We will provide a progress report on the pending strike, outlining what transpired at the Arbitration Commission, and discuss next steps for our collective effort. Let us stand together as we navigate this critical stage. In unity, Max Whitehead, Union President. Satisfied, Max sent the notice to the delegates with instructions to ensure it reached every operator. The strike's momentum depended on this meeting being well attended. Later that afternoon, Peter arrived, his expression troubled. He pulled Max aside. "Max, I've been talking to some of the guys on my unit. They're wavering. A few have outright said their wives don't want them to strike. They need the money. They plan to say so at Friday's meeting." Max took a deep breath, nodding slowly. "Thanks for letting me know, Peter. Tell them that they'll have their chance to speak. Everyone's voice will be heard." Peter relaxed slightly, but added, They're just worried, Max. The bills are piling up, the pressure is mounting, the strain's already showing, and the strike hasn't even started. Max's tone was steady. I get it. We'll give them the space to air their concerns, but we'll also remind them what's at stake. Tuesday the 23rd of December, 1986. The big day had arrived. At midnight, for the first time in Shell Geelong's 35-year history, the operators would abandon their posts. Max had asked the operators to ensure a picket line was maintained at the front gate of the refinery for 24 hours. At 7 p.m, Max called every control room, confirming that they were ready for a coordinated handover at 11 p.m. There was tension in the air. Gary, the vice president, called with troubling news. Shell doesn't have enough operators to oversee the idling refinery. The operators are worried about handing over control. It won't be safe. Max assured him. It's management's responsibility to run the refinery after 11. They have been formally notified, and any issues arise, they know how to contact me. We will not leave them in the lurch. At 11 p.m, the bus passed through the gates carrying managers. Shell had secretly flown in all the managers they could spare from Sydney refinery to help take over the running of the Geelong refinery. What annoyed Max was Shell had clearly abused the operators' admirable sense of duty to safety by trying to inject fear and anxiety into them when they came to walking off their units. One by one, they were dropped off at the control room, taking over from the striking workers. Max stood at the gate watching as the workers gathered for the final briefing before heading home. Gary stood beside him, clipboard in hand. Harold, Max called. Are the shifts covered for those needing time off during the strike? Sorted, Harold replied. We've got volunteers for every shift and backups on standby. And the funds? Enough to keep the picket line running. We'll make it work, Peter nodded. Just focus on leading, Max. We've got the rest. Max sighed, feeling the weight of responsibility resting on his shoulders. He turned back to the towering stacks of the refinery, silent now. What if this was the wrong call? What if jobs were lost? But then he saw the determined face of the operators. They'd placed their trust in him. Max straightened his back, and with a deep breath he raised his hand. It's time, he said, his voice steady. The workers began to file out, and the footsteps heavy but deliberate. Every step was a statement of defiance. They weren't walking away from a job. They were walking into a fight. At 11:45, only 3 operators remained inside the refinery gates. They were at the MoGas plant to stabilise the HF process, as previously agreed with Shell's management. This task was expected to last just a few extra hours. All the other operators gathered at the gate to the car park in the cold night air, their faces illuminated by the distant glow of the refinery. This moment was bigger than the shutdown itself. It was symbolic of unity, a stand against injustice. Max stepped forward, looking each operator in the eye. He drew strength from their presence and began to speak. Men, he stated, his voice steady and firm, today marks the beginning of something far greater than ourselves. We've just walked away from those units, not out of defiance, but out of duty. Duty to each other and our families, and to the principles we stand for. This is not an act of rebellion, it's an act of courage. He let the words settle. The only sound was the distant hum of the refinery, a faint echo of the life they had just left behind. They'll call us reckless, selfish, even traitors, but we know the truth. We stand here today because safety matters more than profits, because respect matters more than convenience, and because we have the right to be heard. A murmur of agreement rippled in through the crowd. From this moment on, we stand united. No one crosses the gate without all of us. We do this together or not at all. His voice hardened. And remember this, the press will be watching. They'll try and twist your words. If they approach you, just say 2 words, no comment. He took a deep breath, then lowered his voice in intense growling. This won't be easy. There will be moments when we doubt ourselves, when the pressure feels unbearable. But look around you. Look at the man standing next to you. This is who we're doing it for, not for ourselves alone, but for every operator who's been ignored, belittled and put in danger. He gestured to the refinery behind them, its towering stacks standing like silent witnesses to their fight. That place doesn't run without us, and today we'll show them just how much we matter. Stand firm, stand strong, and above all, stand united. Max stepped back, letting the weight of his words settle over the group. The men straightened their backs, their resolve clear. Together, they turned towards the picket line, their first steps into the fight now fully underway. Max had warned the operators no comment to the media. Midnight struck, and sure enough, reporters began arriving. Word had spread fast in Melbourne. Then a helicopter hovered overhead, its cameras capturing footage of the refinery lit up against the night sky. When the reporters asked who was in charge, the operators pointed to Max. Max knew the public wouldn't be happy about the strike, especially so close to Christmas. The media would twist his words, making the operators look ridiculous. So when the reporters pressed him, he stood by his own rule: no comment. But the journalists weren't leaving without a story. Max knew that even negative coverage could pressure Shell into action. But he wanted the real story, their fight for safety, not money, to be told. Just as he'd started to debate with media, a Shell security guard approached him. "Bob Kernahan's on the phone for you," he said. "You can take it in my hut." Max nodded and signalled to Gary to join him. Inside the hut, the guard handed him the phone. Bob's voice was firm. "The media's hounding me for a statement. We need to get ahead of this, otherwise Shell will control the narrative." Max explained, "We've told the reporters here no comment." Bob paused, then said, "Tell them that I'll be at the gate at 10 a.m. to make a media statement." Max felt the wave of relief. Public opinion could make or break the strike, and Bob knew how to handle the press. "Thanks, Bob. See you at 10. Max handed the phone back to the security guard. "Usually quiet here at night, but you guys seem to sure liven things up." Then, lowering his voice, he confided, "I've been ordered to keep a log of anyone coming and going, especially you." Max didn't flinch. Instead, he said, "We still have 3 operators inside finishing at the HF acid process. I need permission to walk them out when they're done. No interference, no accusations, just a direct route to the gate." The guard nodded. "Understood." Back outside, Max faced the reporters. "Bob Kernahan from the Melbourne Union office will be here at 10 a.m. to speak on our behalf." Satisfied, the journalist started to leave. At 2 a.m, Max checked the picket line. The men were holding firm, sitting in cars with their thermoses and their banners waving in the night breeze. Finally, Max allowed himself a few hours of badly needed sleep. He needed to stay sharp. This fight had only just begun. Wednesday the 24th of December, 1986. At 6 a.m, Max arrived back at the picket line. The crisp morning air turned his breath to mist. A dozen operators stood around sipping steaming coffee, their usual camaraderie laced with tension. Gary met Max halfway, his expression grim. "They're still in there, Max." "The guys on the HF acid plant. It's been 8 hours. They said they'd only take a few." Max's brow furrowed. Something was wrong. Max wasted no time. He strode straight to the security guard. The guard, who had been friendly enough the day before, gave him a wary smile. "Morning, Max. What can I do for you?" Max's voice was firm. "We need to go in and get these last 3 guys out. Gary and I will escort them." The guard hesitated, flipping through his logbook. "There's a note here. You have consent to go directly to the HF acid plant and back. No wandering, no trouble." Max muttered under his breath. Trouble's already brewing. He and Gary stepped through the gates. The refinery was eerily silent. The usual roar of machinery was gone, replaced with an unsettling hum. Steam vents hissed unexpectedly, making them jump. The quiet felt unnatural. Was there a problem with this plant? Or was there more sinister happening at the HF acid plant? When they reached the unit, just as the weak morning sun filtered through the haze of steel pipes. Inside the control room, 3 operators stood rigidly. Their faces were pale. In front of them stood Mark Sellers, the refinery manager, flanked by 2 other managers. Mark's voice was low, but insistent. "If anything goes wrong while you're gone, you'll be held personally liable. You could lose everything, your homes, your savings. Are you willing to risk that?" The operators looked at Max, uncertainty in their eyes. Before they could respond, Max stormed in. "Mark, that's untrue and you know it." Mark spun around, startled. "Max, this is a private discussion." Max cut him off. "You're threatening these men with lies. If anyone were to be sued, it wouldn't be them, it would be the union. These men are exercising their lawful right to strike." Silence. Mark's face tightened, but he said nothing. Max turned to the operators, his tone softening. "Finish your handover, gather your things, and let's go." Relief washed over their face. Minutes later, they emerged carrying their belongings. As they walked out of the refinery, another steam vent hissed, making them flinch. Max clenched his fist, anger simmering beneath the surface. The battle for safety had only just begun, but today they'd won a small, critical victory. Max had urged the operators to get as many of their colleagues together as possible to turn up for the press release at 10 o'clock. It was critical for optics to have the strong presence at the gates. The operators, ever resourceful, made the best of the situation. One of them pulled out a barbecue from his vehicle and set it up. Others had brought plenty of food to go around. Soon the air was filled with sizzling aroma of bacon, eggs and sausages. Max approached them. "Mind if I take a plate over to the security guard?" They agreed, and Max carried a heaped plate of food to the guard's hut. The guard was appreciative but politely declined. "Thanks, Max, but I've got my own food." As 10 a.m. struck, the hum of anticipation grew louder. The convoy of media vehicles pulled up at the refinery gates, their logos gleaming under the morning sun. Reporters with microphones and cameras spilled out, gathering near the picket line, their movements purposeful. The operators stood firm, placards held high and their presence commanding. Then, union organiser Bob Kernahan arrived. Dressed smartly but casually, he embodied the workers he represented, practical but not pretentious. He needed to win the support of ordinary Australians, not those in suits trying to intimidate. His presence alone commanded attention. His calm, unwavering demeanour radiated authority and resolve. Bob stepped onto the wooden crate as an improvised platform from the back of a truck. He surveyed the crowd, both media and operators, and cleared his throat. Then he began to speak. "This strike isn't about greed. It's not about disrupting lives. It's about something far more fundamental: safety. Safety for the men who keep this refinery running. Safety for the families and the communities that surround it." The camera zoomed in. Every microphone turned towards him. His words were clear, deliberate, and persuasive. These workers are asking for something that should be non-negotiable: adequate staffing, proper training, and respect for the risks they face every single day. Without them, this refinery wouldn't produce a single drop of oil. But instead of investing in safety, Shell has chosen profits over people. That's why we're here. The crowd grew quiet. The only sound was clicking of cameras, capturing every expression, every gesture. Bob's passion was palatable. His words framed the workers not as disruptors but as guardians of both the refinery and the community's well-being. A safe refinery benefits everyone, not just these workers, but the entire state of Victoria. If standing together today means preventing a disaster tomorrow, then this fight is worth having. A ripple of applause spread through the operators. Reporters scribbled notes, cameras continued rolling, headlines were going to be made and crafted. Max stood beside Bob, his pride unmistakable. Bob had just turned their struggle into a cause every Australian could understand and support. As Bob stepped down from the crate, Max met his gaze and nodded in silent gratitude. Bob leaned in and spoke quietly. We'll have to keep the press well informed. In the next few days, I'll hold another press conference. We need to control the story. Shell's spin will be coming. Max nodded. You won't be interrupted Christmas Day. Enjoy it and your family. Bob gave a small smile, then departed, heading back to Melbourne. By the afternoon, news bulletins across Victoria carried the story. Due to a safety issue at Shell Geelong, petrol supplies could dry up by Christmas. Most reports quoted Bob, emphasising that operators had been left with no choice but to strike out of a grave concern for their safety. The message had landed, and the pressure on Shell was building. That afternoon, something unexpected happened. First, Brian Loughnane called Max. Max, Shell didn't think you would actually go through with the strike, Brian admitted. Are you sure you won't reconsider? An extended strike will cause statewide disruption. Max's response was firm. It's gone too far. The operators have spoken. The only way to stop this is for Shell to provide the extra manning for CDU4. They ended the conversation on good terms, but it was an impasse. Then on the 26th of December, Max received another phone call. This time it was from Peter Jones, the operations manager for the CDU plants, and Max's toughest adversary in the past negotiations. Max, can we meet for a quiet chat? Peter asked. Max, on his day off, invited Peter to his home, somewhere they wouldn't be disturbed. Peter arrived, and while they exchanged small talk, Max made them both coffee. Then the conversation turned serious. The discussion was frank but cordial. Neither man backed down. Peter made it clear his instructions came from the top. Even Kevin Gosper, the chairman and chief executive of Shell Australia, had personally ordered management not to give in to their union's demands. They ended their meeting, agreeing to disagree. Friday, December the 26th, 1986. The Union Hall was packed. Tension filled the air. Max stood in front, flanked by Gary, Peter and Harold. A silent display of unity. The operators filed in, some avoiding eye contact, others exchanging uneasy glances. The strain of the strike was written across their faces. Max opened the meeting with a clear, concise summary of the arbitration proceedings. He explained the Commissioner's insistence on further discussion and their upcoming meeting with management. Then he paused, letting his words settle. "This strike isn't easy," he admitted, "but it's not supposed to be. We're fighting for something bigger than ourselves: safety, respect, and the dignity we deserve as people who make this refinery run." A murmur spread across the crowd. Then an operator from Peter's unit stood up. "Max, with all due respect, some of us think it's time to go back. Our wives aren't happy. We're bleeding out here." The room erupted, some in agreement, some in defiance. Max raised his hands, calling for order. "I hear you," he said calmly, "and I promise we'll vote on this today. Every opinion matters." What followed was raw, charged discussion. Operators spoke about family pressures, financial strain, and the weight of the strike. Gary and Harold reminded them why they started this fight: the safety risks, the need for solidarity. But it was clear the unity was once defined them was beginning to crack. Finally, Max called for a vote. One by one, the operators lined up to cast their ballots. The room was silent, heavy with anticipation. When the votes were counted, 67% chose to continue the strike. It was a majority, but a fractured one. After the meeting, Max pulled Gary and Peter and Harold aside. "We need to keep the vote result confidential from management," he said firmly. "If they find out how close it was, they'll use it against us." Gary nodded. "Agreed, but Max, we've got to be realistic. These guys are losing steam." Peter sighed. "We've held things together this long, but we can't keep calling meetings like this. Every time we do, the cracks get bigger. I'm counting on the Commissioner to force Shell's hand." Max ran his hand through his hair. "I don't know. We have to buy time. If we can hold on a little bit longer, maybe we'll get a breakthrough." The three men exchanged solemn nods. They were loyal to Max, loyal to the cause, but they all felt it. The momentum was slipping. As they left the hall, a weight settled on Max's chest. He couldn't shake the feeling the battle was slipping from his hands. The strike resolve was weakening. The clock was ticking. For the 300 operators, Christmas and New Year in 1986 was unlike any they'd ever experienced. Normally this time of year meant rotating shifts, pulling fathers away from their families, disrupting Christmas morning, leaving meals uneaten, while the refinery demanded their attention. Over 80% of the operators would have been scheduled to work at some point during the holidays. The hum of the refinery was always in the background, a stark contrast to the joy and celebration happening outside its gates. But this year was different. For the first time in decades, the operators were home, not just for a shift or a day, but an entire holiday period. The relief was palatable. Fathers who had missed countless Christmas mornings now sat with their children as they tore open gifts. Families shared meals and for once had everybody present. Yet the joy was mixed with anxiety. There was no money coming in. Bills sat in the kitchen counters and due dates crept closer. Some wives voiced growing concerns, and the holiday cheer overshadowed their financial stress. The weight of this dual reality was inescapable. The strike was righteous about safety, dignity and respect, but it came at a steep personal price. In the quiet moments as Christmas lights flickered and the laughter faded into the night, many operators found themselves staring into the darkness, wrestling with uncertainty. Was their cause worth it? Would their resolve hold? Could they reduce the sacrifices ahead? And yet, for all the doubt, there was shared determination. The rare gift of uninterrupted family time strengthened their resolve. But this sacrifice meant a safer future, not just for them, but for every operator who followed it. It was a burden worth willing to bear. The fight wasn't just about the present. It was about ensuring future holidays wouldn't carry the same risks and fears. For now, they hung to the hope, even as the shadow of financial strain loomed ever larger. Max was in bed when the shrill ring of the phone shattered the silence. He glanced at the clock, 11:47 p.m. The strike had made late-night calls a grimly familiar occurrence. Though exhausted, Max reached for the receiver, bracing himself. "Max here," he answered, his voice rough and fatigued. A voice unfamiliar but direct replied, "G'day, Max." It was his counterpart from Western Australia Refinery, a man he'd met a few times at the ACTU meetings. Max frowned, sitting up in bed. "Not at all. What can I do for you?" The caller hesitated. "I've been hearing a lot about your strike." And I tightened. "And I thought I'd better warn you about something." Max gripped the receiver tighter. "Go on." The man's voice dropped. "We had a Kiwi like you, pulled something similar here a few years back, stood strong, ruffled some feathers. The union leadership didn't like it." Max's breath slowed. "And?" "Some strangers paid him a visit." A heavy silence hung between them. They stood him against a wall and drove a car straight into his legs, broke both of them, sent a message loud and clear. Max clenched his jaw. "Are you warning me I might be next?" "I'm telling you to be careful. You're stirring the pot, mate. Some people don't like their power base disturbed. Watch your back." Max exhaled sharply. "I appreciate the warning, but I won't be scared off. These operators deserve better, and I won't stop until they get it." The caller paused. "Fair enough. Just don't let your guard down. Sometimes it's not the company you've got to watch, it's the people who think you're rocking the boat too hard." The line went dead. Max stared at the phone. A chill ran through him. Not fear, anger. The idea that standing up for what was right could provoke such violence was both enraging and sobering. Max leaned forward, elbows on his knees. The room was silent except for the faint hum in the fridge up next door. The words replayed in his mind. Strangers paid him a visit, broke both his legs, sent a message loud and clear. Max clenched his fist. This wasn't just about a strike anymore. It wasn't just about safety or better conditions. It was about power. And power didn't change hands easily. He wasn't naive. He knew pushing against the system came at a cost, but backing down, that wasn't an option. He thought of the operators, men who had put their trust in him. If he walked away now, what kind of a leader would he be? No. If they wanted him to back down, they'd have to do more than making a threatening phone call. Max grabbed his jacket from the back of the door. The night air was cold, but he didn't care. He needed to clear his head. He stepped into the yard. The words of the old foreman echoed in his mind. Some fights aren't just about words. They can get real ugly, real fast. Max took a deep breath, steeling himself. If this fight was going to get ugly, he was damn sure going to be ready for it. The next morning, still unsettled, Max knew he needed to tell someone. But not the union. If the threat came from inside, that would only make things worse. He needed someone rational, pragmatic. Brian Loughnane. Max dialed the number. Brian, I need to talk to you privately. Brian's curiosity was evident. Sure, Max, what's this about? Max didn't hesitate. Not the strike, not directly. He re-encountered everything. The phone call, the Kiwi from Western Australia, the chilling warning. Brian listened in silence. Then a slow exhale. You sure about this? Max's voice was firm. I have no reason to doubt it. A pause. And you're telling me because? Max's answer was blunt. Because I can't go to anyone else. If this came from the union or someone connected to it, bringing it up there would only make it worse. But I can't sit on it either. Brian considered this. All right, Max, thanks for letting me know. My advice, keep your head down. Stay vigilant and don't go looking for trouble. If anything else happens, tell me immediately. Max frowned. That's it? Stay vigilant? Brian, this isn't some prank call. Someone's trying to send a message. Brian's voice hardened. Max, you're in a strike that's making headlines and enemies. Emotions are running high on all sides. I'll pass this up the chain, but there's only so much I can do. For now, stay sharp and let me know if anything else escalates. Frustrated, Max knew Brian wasn't the type to make empty promises. Fine. Brian's tone softened. Just keep me in the loop, mate. The conversation gave Max little comfort, but at least now someone else knew about the threat. It wasn't much, but it was something. Max squared his shoulders, drove back to the picket line. Whatever was coming, he'd met it head on. Sunday, the 28th of December, 1986. By mid-afternoon, Max called Bob Kernahan, who informed him of an important press conference. 8 p.m. tonight at the Melbourne Union offices, Bob said. We need to update the media on the Commission's involvement. Max didn't hesitate. I'll be there. Bob reminded him. We're back at the Commission tomorrow at 10 a.m. back up here in Melbourne. Max nodded. I'll make it happen. At 6:15 p.m, Max left for Melbourne. The journey took an hour and a half, giving him time to reflect. The battle was intensifying, and tonight's press conference would be critical in keeping the public informed and the pressure on Shell. When Max arrived, Bob was already in his element, speaking confidently to the gathered reporters. Bob began. The operators remained steadfast. They voted to stay on strike, and the Commissioner is now involved. We will not back down until Shell provides the necessary staffing to ensure a safe working environment. The reporters fired questions, one cutting straight to the point. Surely it's Shell's right to manage their own operators? They own it, not the operators. Bob responded swiftly, his tone unwavering. You're right, they own it. But without the operators, it's nothing. These men have a right to protect themselves from injury and death. Like any business, there are running costs, and safety should always be the top priority. The room fell quiet, the weight of his words sinking in. After the press conference, Bob turned to Max. Are you staying in Melbourne tonight? Max shook his head. No, I'm heading back to the picket line, but I'll be back here in the morning for the Commissioner's hearing. Bob gave him a firm nod. All right, see you at 10. As Max drove back to the refinery, exhaustion tugging at him, but his resolve remained firm. The fight wasn't over yet. Tomorrow would be another battle, but he was ready. Monday, 29th of December, 1986. The drive to Melbourne was sombre. Max gripped the steering wheel tightly, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. The hum of the car engine was the only sound for long stretches. Gary sat in the passenger seat, his usual stoic presence a quiet source of strength. Occasionally he broke the silence with words of encouragement, but even he knew this battle rested squarely on Max's shoulders. The Australian Conciliation and Arbitration Commission building loomed ahead. The grand structure, imposing on their first visit, now seemed even larger. Its high columns cast long shadows over the entrance. Max and Gary exchanged a glance as they climbed the steps, a silent acknowledgement of the uphill battle that they are facing. Inside, the Commissioner wasted no time. Max and Brian Loughnane were called into his private office, leaving Gary and the union representatives and Shell executives in the waiting area. The room was small but formal, and a heavy wooden desk anchored the Commissioner in authority. Max took the seat beside Brian, who adjusted his tie, his expression unreadable. Gentlemen, the Commissioner began, his tone measured but firm. I trust you both had fruitful discussions with your respected parties. Max cleared his throat. I called a mass meeting yesterday, Commissioner. The operators voted to continue the strike. He made a deliberate choice not to reveal the cracks forming in their unity unless asked. Brian gave a small nod, his face neutral. Shell's position remains unchanged. We believe the current staffing levels are sufficient. We've communicated clearly to Mr. Whitehead and his team. The Commissioner leaned forward, his gaze sharp. So we still have an impasse. This can't continue indefinitely. He steepled his fingers. Let's explore alternatives. What about a trial period for CDU4? Wouldn't that provide an opportunity to test the feasibility of the operator's concerns? Brian seized the opportunity. That's precisely what Shell has proposed. Commissioner, a trial operation under the current staffing levels will prove that the operator's fears are unfounded. Max's jaw tightened. His voice was steady but laced with frustration. And if something goes wrong during the trial? If we can't persuade Shell now to increase staffing, will they only understand the risks after blood has been spilled? After a catastrophe occurs? Are we supposed to stand by and wait for the worst to happen before they listen? A heavy silence filled the room. Even Brian shifted uncomfortably, his polished demeanour faltering. The Commissioner leaned back, contemplating. This is a serious accusation, Mr. Whitehead, but I cannot ignore the gravity of your concerns. He turned to Brian. Mr. Loughnane, would Shell reconsider its position if tangible risks were identified during the trial period? Brian quickly regained his composure, shaking his head. Commissioner, the trial is designed to confirm that those risks don't exist. Shell's engineering team is confident in the safety measures already in place. Max leaned forward, his frustration barely contained. Confident? With all due respect, Commissioner, confidence isn't enough when lives are at stake. The Commissioner sighed, drumming his fingers on the desk. Gentlemen, we're not making progress here. I want both of you to reconvene with your respective parties and explore this further. You will return to this office in 48 hours with actionable proposals." Max and Brian exchanged a brief tense glance as they rose from their chairs. As Max left the office, frustration boiled beneath the surface. He knew the commissioners were trying to broker a compromise, but the stakes were too high for half measures. Walking back to the car, Gary clapped a hand on Max's shoulder. "Don't lose heart, Max," he said quickly. "You said what needed to be said, and that counts for something." Max nodded, but the weight of the fight ahead bore down heavily on him. The road back to Geelong felt longer than ever. The battle was far from over, and time was running out. As Max, Bob and Gary exited the Commissioner's building, the weight of the morning's proceedings still heavily on their shoulders, a stranger approached. Dressed in a sharp suit, he carried himself with unmistakable confidence of authority. He extended a hand, which Max hesitated before shaking. "I'm with the state Labor government," the man said, his tone brisk and direct. "I've been sent to relay a message. If the refinery is not operational soon, the government will have no choice but to step in. We'll bring in the army to run it." Max blinked, caught off guard by the bluntness of the statements. He glanced at Bob, who raised an eyebrow but remained silent, his expression unreadable. Turning back to the man, Max's initial surprise gave way to simmering frustration. "That's not going to happen," Max said firmly, his voice steady but laced with irritation. "No army personnel can run the refinery. It takes years to learn how to operate those units. Years of experience, training, understanding the intricacies of the process. You can't just drop a stranger and expect them to manage it safely." The man frowned, as if unwilling to accept Max's words at face value. "The government can't allow the stalemate to drag on indefinitely," he countered. Max crossed his arms, his resolve hardening. "Dragging untrained people into the refinery would be reckless, dangerous, and a disaster waiting to happen. This isn't about turning a few knobs and flipping switches. It's about understanding a complex system where one wrong move could cost lives." Bob finally spoke, his voice calm and authoritative. "Max is right. If the government wants the refinery running, they need to work with us, not threaten us with untenable solutions. The operators are the only ones who can run that refinery safely, and we're fighting to make sure they can do it under the right conditions." The stranger seemed momentarily at loss of words, clearly unused to being challenged so directly. After a pause, he gave a curt nod. "I'll pass your concerns on," he said tensely, before turning and walking away. Max watched him go, his frustration mingling with a sense of grim determination. This wasn't just a battle against Shell. It was a fight against the system, and often failed to understand or value the expertise of those that really did the work. He turned to Bob, who gave him a small nod of approval. "Let them try," Max muttered under his breath as they walked away. "They'll see soon enough who really keeps the place running." The picket line buzzed with tension, but morale was lifting, largely due to the media presence managed by Bob Kernahan. Every day or two, Bob stood before the journalists delivering sharp, clear up-to-dates on the strike. His messages were concise, emphasising the operators' unwavering commitment to safety, not greed. Max made sure he was always beside Bob at these press conferences, standing as a symbol of the operators' solidarity. Bob's eloquence translated the complex, gritty realities of the refinery work into a language that public could understand. The strategy was working, despite the looming New Year's holidays and the fuel shortages disrupting Victorian summer plans. The media coverage shifted. Headlines no longer painted the operators as troublemakers. Instead, they were seen as protectors of community safety. Articles detailed the risks of understaffed units and the volatility of a CDU4 process and the catastrophic consequences of neglect of safety. Television segments showed operators on the picket line holding placards high, their determination evident despite the sweltering December heat. Max believed Bob's media efforts were having a real impact. Though financial strain and family pressures weighed heavily, morale remained surprisingly steady. On the picket line, operators openly discussed news articles and TV reports, drawing strength from the public's understanding. In reality, the media reports were holding the fragile striking operators together. Ever frustrated spouses urging them to return to work couldn't fully erode the camaraderie and shared purposes. Max heard stories of heated arguments at home, but those same men still returned to the picket line each day, heads held high. Sitting alone in his modest car in the refinery car park, Max cradled a cup of tea in his hands. The picket line was quiet for now, but the relentless demands of leading the strike had finally embedded enough to allow him a moment to think. He stared out the window. The silent refinery tower standing against the faded light, just as his own energy often seemed to. His journey had felt like a lifetime and a blink of the eye all at once. It had started with an ambitious young man determined to climb higher to prove himself in the industrial jungle of Shell's Geelong refinery. He hadn't dreamed of strikes and battles. He'd wanted to rise through the ranks to master every operation to one day stand at the helm. But life had other plans. Over the years, he'd seen the cracks in the system, the disregard for safety, the contempt for the operators who kept the refinery running. The fight had found him, and now he stood not in admiration of the towering refinery, but in defiance of the corporate arrogance that had put lives at risk. This strike had tested him. The weight of expectations, the self-doubt, the constant scrutiny. Each day he found the strength to continue, not for himself, but for the man beside him. Gary, steady and loyal. Peter, fearless and speaking hard truths. Harold, unyielding in his determination. And the operators, standing on that picket line, struggling financially, facing family pressures, yet refusing to back down. But cracks were forming. Shell would not budge. Morale was fraying, and Max feared the day it would come all crashing down. Still, this was bigger than staffing numbers. It was safety protocols. This was about justice, respect, the right to be heard. Whether they won or lost, Max vowed he would give it everything. If they succeeded, he would cherish the victory. If they failed, he'd walk away knowing he'd fought to his last breath. Leaning back, he let out a long sigh. The stars appeared above him. The road ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear. He would see it through. No matter where it led, the fight was far from over. A knock on Max's car window pulled him from his deep thoughts. A fellow operator stood outside. The security guard said there's a call for you in his hut. Max quickly made his way down to the hut, his mind racing. It had to be Bob or management. Either way, it was urgent. He stepped up into the entrance, reaching for the receiver and steadying his voice. Max Whitehead speaking. On the other end, Brian Loughnane, Shelf's industrial manager, spoke. His tone was measured, hesitant, and different. Max, I've got an update from management. Shell is prepared to agree to an additional operator for CDU4. Max exhaled sharply. Relief washed over him, but he knew better than to celebrate just yet. Brian wasn't finished. Max's relief hardened into determination. You know we'll oppose that, Brian, he replied. Would Shell agree to wait for the Commissioner's final decision before acting on that reduction? Brian hesitated. Maybe, he admitted, but I need to confirm that. I'll need this in writing, Max stated. I'll take it to the operators for a vote. I'll see what we can do, Brian responded. There was no hostility in his voice, just an understanding that this battle was reaching a critical turning point. Brian added that he was prepared to telex and send it to the security guard as soon as possible. We'd only upset the Commissioner if we acted before his ruling, so it's likely we'll wait, he admitted. As the call ended, Max took a deep breath. The weight of the last 8 days of striking pressed on him, but for the first time, a glimmer of victory was within reach. Stepping outside, the cool air hit Max's face. He scanned the picket line. Gary was the first to notice something was different. "What is it, Max?" he asked. "They've agreed to extra operators," Max said, "but there's a catch. They want to take it to the Commissioner to try and wind the numbers back over the coming months." Gary nodded. "Still, that's a win, isn't it?" Max allowed himself a small smile. "It's more than a win, it's a chance." With that, he instructed Gary to call Peter and Harold and relay the details. "Keep it to yourselves now," Max said. "We'll need to call an urgent mass meeting first, and the operators will decide whether to end the strike." The phone calls began. Operators summoned to the Union Hall. The message was clear. Shell has tabled a new proposal. There will be a vote. By the time Max arrived at the Union Hall, it was packed to capacity. Tension filled the air. Anticipation, exhaustion, hope. Max took the front, his team standing resolutely behind him. He laid it out plainly. "Shell has agreed to give us an additional operators we've been fighting for." The ripple of murmurs spread through the room. "But," Max continued, "they plan to take it to the Commission to reduce those numbers back over the next few months." More murmurs, uncertainty, mix of cautious optimism. Max raised a hand for quiet. "Here's the key. They've agreed to wait for the Commissioner's decision before acting. This means that the fight for retention won't be on the picket line, it'll be in the Commission." He let that sink in before delivering the decision to them. "It's up to you. You can end the strike now, or we can hold out for something more. This is a step forward. It's a victory, but it's not a final one." A few men spoke up, most in favour of calling the strike off. Some argued, "If the Commissioner rules against us, we can strike again later." Finally, Max called for the vote. "Those in favour of calling the strike off, raise your hands." Slowly, one by one, hands rose to the air. It was decisive. The strike was over. After 8 days of striking, operators returned to work. The refinery slowly resumed operations, its massive infrastructure roaring back into life. It had been a hard fight, a grueling 8 days of uncertainty. And for the first time in a long time, they had made Shell listen. August 1987. Months passed, and when the decision arrived ruling in favour of retaining the extra operators, it was more than a victory, it was a validation. The battle was won. The road ahead was uncertain for Max, but he knew one thing. He wouldn't wait for good things to happen. He had to move on and away from Shell. If the next battle came, he would face it head on, just as he'd done this one. For now, though, there was hope, and that was enough. A true story written and narrated by Max Whitehead.